cook it with emotion. Yeah, treat it like it's sacred, like it's sacred.
So the name of the session is preparing to regather in a changed world. Just to make sure that you are in the right session. And a brief description. We are going to focus on understanding how the pandemic has impacted us psychologically and explore strategies to help prepare for re-entry. Also, we'll be exploring what we need to consider as we begin to plan to return to community and to have our community organizations or individuals start re-engaging in the world. So brief introduction, I'm Kathleen Hoffman. I'm a Sacramento regional contact. I've been that since 2013. First burn was 2006. I am also a licensed marriage family therapist practicing at a nonprofit in Lincoln, California. We specialize in trauma. It's called trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I have specialized over the years in anger management support groups, using a modality really now that's being considered to support individuals from experiencing trauma from the pandemic. So as a regional contact, I have some of my cohorts here. I'm also a co-creator of the Multi-Regional Summit with an emphasis in leadership learning. So guiding our leaders to become better leaders and support our communities. What I'd like to do also is introduce our speakers and speak a little bit about them. We have Dr. Yasin Choudry, and he has been with the crisis interventions team on Playa for Burning Man for 3 years. He is a board certified psychiatrist with expertise in clinical psychiatry and recovery from addictions and trauma. He completed his psychiatry residency at Wayne State University in Michigan, and he's currently working with adolescents age 13 through 17 at an inpatient residential unit in Idaho Falls, correct? Okay. And then we have Verity Owers, or V. She joins us from London. And she's an accredited counselor who specializes in bereavement. She was inspired by the Deaf Cafe movement and the ethos of Burning Man. And she set up Dust to Dust in 2012, which gave burners a space to talk about death and dying. And this is a topic so often in some societies, it's not as openly normalized or discussed. She is presented at the European Leadership Summit on topics including bereavement, best practices at burn events. And in March of 2021, just recently, she curated the Burner Day of Reflection to honor losses and the changes we experienced as a result of the pandemic. Her work is intended to support others through grief and loss, with the opportunity to experience growth and the celebration of life. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, V?
No, that's wonderful. I think that's everything, but said so beautifully. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. So I was going to let you know how this is kind of going to roll out. Each speaker will present. And then right after each speaker, we will have a 10-minute Q&A. It's a time for you to, all the curiosities brought up in the discussion or the presentation, while it's still fresh in your mind, you can ask questions and the speaker will provide answers to you. You can either raise your hand or you can put your questions in the chat or jot them down and ask them directly to the speaker. And near the end of so we'll do that with each speaker, and then near the end of the presentation, we would love to have some audience participation. We're calling it a wisdom share, and it's a time that will allow for you to share your insights and experiences and what you notice about yourself or others or your community. So keeping 2 questions in mind, so I'm kind of preloading this, what you believe the needs of your community are right now, and thoughts and ideas that you have to support your community. Of course, we'll have support from Dr. Choudry and V during that discussion. And then at the end, V is going to lead us in a brief closing process that will focus on resilience. So with that, what we're hoping is this session will provide you with knowledge and with the knowledge and some tools to use during this time that we move forward into reopening, which, much like the pandemic, has been a time of uncertainty and a time of change and a time of loss. And with all of that, now there's this enthusiasm to move forward, but also there's going to be a need to be able to process and support each other through this as we open back up. So I would like to introduce Dr. Choudry. He'll present information on stress trauma, PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and grief in the aftermath of COVID, and some coping strategies to support you and your community and others. So it's great information, what you need to know and what you can take with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Choudry.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. So I want to deep dive into developmental trauma, emotional neglect, and PTSD because they are all related. You can't talk about PTSD unless you realize that a developmental trauma has actually occurred. And one of the most common causes of developmental traumas is emotional neglect. And then I'll go into grief. And I also want to touch upon the level 200 on the map of consciousness. So this is the map of consciousness. As you can see that there are numbers in the center of the screen. The numbers are from 0 to 1,000. And grief is at 75, as you can see. The number 200 is where the arrows start going up. So it's a more expansive state. And below 200 is where the arrows are actually coming down. So it's a more contracted state. So when we talk about grief, it's an experience that we have. It dips our consciousness into like a depth of despair, darkness, and it then rebounds and goes up. And I think the farther down we go, the higher up we can actually go. So this is how the human consciousness is evolving right now. So to say that we dipped into grief is a bad thing. It's not. It's actually just for the growth of humanity. This is an experience that everybody needs to have. So the way the map of consciousness can be seen is that where am I at? Like, where is my number? How evolved I am? That's one way to look at it. I usually stay between 199 to 390. That's my range. But then I often go into 50 as well when like something really sad happens. So that's one way to see is where is this human being at? Where is his evolution at? And the second way to look at the map is to see where the emotional state is, like how is this person feeling right now? So that feeling state could be like, if you look at this state, the shame and guilt, this is more psychotic states and delusional states. Apathy and grief are more depressive states. Fear is anxiety states. Desire is addiction states. Anger is manic states. So this is a way for us to have a discussion about grief. So as I said already, the level 200 is of extreme importance because once human beings hit 200, they can discern truth from falsehood and they can become more attuned and intuitive. Instead of having to figure everything out from the head, they become kind of connected to some higher powers that guide them. So let's dive into acute and chronic stress. So acute stress disorder is something that's happening right now on the planet because COVID was a direct threat to our life and the lives of others we knew. So that fear is like rampant in humanity right now, which is coming up in a lot of different emotional states. So the PTSD, the first state is acute stress disorder. So this is when the virus is still happening, people are still dying. That will be the acute stress reaction stage. So acute stress subtly affects our regular life functioning, relationships, our connection to life. If it's left uncontrolled, we can get triggered. And we have a desire to self-soothe using drugs and alcohol and addictive activities, which provides temporary relief, but then we just need to keep chasing. We get buzzed and then we follow, it's just followed by a sense of emptiness. And then there's a transition stage that we're going to go through when we will find that the people have been vaccinated already and the virus has stopped. So then there'll be a transition stage. And then the third stage would be that about 10% of the population will develop PTSD. And there are a lot of things that predispose people to having PTSD. I believe that the burner community, for example, would probably not see a 10%. They will probably see like a 1% or 0.5% of their overall numbers. But even 0.5% for Burning Man would be like 300 people. So a lot of people are going to be affected. So PTSD is a serious crisis. It can present in any different way. Typically, people are just, they are stuck in the past. They just keep ruminating about stuff that they can't change, and they just feel bad about it. And then they keep getting triggered, like something happens and they get really upset about it. So they can feel anxious, they can feel depressed. It can present in many different ways. You can't really say that this is what PTSD is going to look like. It can present in maybe 100 different ways. So PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. So what is the trauma and what is the stress in the PTSD? So what we have to understand is that the trauma that happened, it actually happened in childhood. It is a developmental trauma wound. It's usually like the child had an emotional need to be seen or to be hugged, and he didn't get that. So now that child actually gets stuck in that stage, and a persona is created, like it's a self-image. It's called the protector self. So the protector self is created to deal with this experience that the child just had of being neglected. So that protector self can look like anything. It can look like somebody who's really stoic and well put together and very independent and completely self-reliant and not giving a damn about anybody else and being a perfectionist. That could be a protector self that could come up about a child crying and the mother kind of ignoring the child while the child is crying because the mother thinks that that's good for the child. So now you have the authentic self, that's the child that's got hurt, right? The child had a need to be loved or to be protected, and that need was not met. So that's the authentic self that we are. We are the vulnerable self that are going around our lives seeking experiences, curious, vulnerable, looking for connection, love. And the protector self is the image that we have created, that if we could be this, then we won't have to worry about what just happened, that my mother doesn't really love me really, that I'm worthless. So and that all of this is going to get repressed. And then the protector self is going to take over. So the protector self is, as I said, part of the ego. And everybody has a protector self. So when people are having like a abnormal emotional experience, they are actually responding to the childhood trauma. So what was the childhood trauma? That your emotional needs were not met. So if your emotional needs are not met, you could get triggered into believing that that it's a problem.
So, Dr. Choudry, when we talk about triggers
Mhm.
and PTSD, what you're saying is some of our old stuff that we've probably carried around with us for many, many years is what's actually showing up.
Yes. So trigger means that there was an event that happened in the past that was not completed. And because whatever you were feeling in that moment was so much that you kind of zoned out and you didn't really feel those feelings, and they're still left unprocessed. So the brain is holding them in separate places. That memory was dismembered and put in different parts of the brain. And now something has triggered it, and that memory needs to integrate. So it's reminding you, hello, something happened in your childhood, you forgot, there's a price you have to pay for that. It's like it's a credit card payment that's coming to be paid. It's not just going to go away. So a trigger is reminding you that there's underlying trauma that needs to be healed. So and the trauma is usually repressed, so you don't have a memory of it.
So I see, thank you so much. I see hands up of Laura Hopwood and Alita. And then after that would be, I think I'm seeing Jim with Costume Cult.
Hi, I was curious. I'm thinking about if you are seeing, say, a community member who you think is grieving and can't seem to be coming out of it, is there a duration? Or when does it become, I think, what you called complicated grief? Like, how do you help that person recognize when maybe, I don't know, is there like a time period for grief and when it becomes something that's they can't seem to get past?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, certainly I can respond to that. I would say that in terms of a timeline, it's very hard to say definitively, you know, this is how long grief takes. You know, it's very much, it's an individual process. It's something that's unique to the individual, unique to the relationship. But certainly we can kind of see some patterns that emerge. And I would say, you know, that a normal kind of course of grief, you know, you would be expecting to see somebody potentially kind of very upset and emotional, or, you know, kind of struggling, but in a normal way. So it, you know, it's a painful process, but they will be going through that process normally for, say, sort of 3 to 4, 6 months, something like that. Another pattern that you'll see is around the kind of the first year mark, you know, when somebody has been through the first anniversary, they've been through the kind of the first birthday without their loved one, or the first Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever. So things might start to sort of shift and change after that. So those will be some sort of markers along the way. And as I said, they're not, you know, they're not definitive. That's not everybody's experience. But I would say that in terms of what you might be wanting to look out for to kind of get a sense of what's normal and what's complicated, what's kind of not a normal grief process, it's more about how is this person coping? You know, people will kind of oscillate between adapting and coping and perhaps, you know, real extremes of emotion, and kind of getting on with their life and going to work and seeing their friends, and that's normal, that kind of swinging between the two. But when they're really unable to cope, when they're really kind of unable to function, when they can't go to work, when they can't get out of bed, you know, that would be more the sort of the markers to say, actually, this person needs more than just the support of family and friends and loved ones who are gonna help them. Does that answer your question, Lara? Appreciate it's not quite such an easy timeline to
Right.
give.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Good.
So next up we have Alida de Tiburon. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Aleta is fine.
Alida. Okay.
Yeah, I would like to get a little more clarity. I was not sure if I followed exactly what you were saying around the protective self and how childhood trauma, if that's a separate trauma, or if that's how that connects with the trauma of the pandemic. Basically, is there an assumption that all of us have experienced some sort of trauma in our childhood and have a set of learned behaviors of how we manage that trauma, and that comes out when we experience other traumas in our lives?
Yeah, so I'll try to explain it, but I'm also trying to figure it out. This is an evolving field. It's we are beginning to figure this thing out just like right now. We're beginning to understand this. A lot of people are. So it's I'm also one of the people trying to figure it out. So the protector self is universal. All of us have a protector self. That's the part of us that shows up in the world. Once you understand that, you realize that the personality is fake. The personality is covering up our original need that was not met. So, but then we can actually integrate the protector self into our personality for our life to work better. But for some people, the protector self is not healthy. The experience was not good. Like the child was abused or something bad happened, and the child felt that I'm not good enough, or there's something wrong with me. That protector self may look really ugly and may show up from time to time as being controlling or egotistical or harsh or punitive. It could come out in any way. So, but the protector self is universal. We are all our ego. Protector self is the ego. So the PTSD is that you had a loss that reminded you of the experience. That original experience was triggered, and then the protector self went wild, trying to come up with an explanation of why this is happening to me. Why is life so difficult? Why do people do this to me? So that protector self was unhealthy to start with, and it became a little sick. So that's what PTSD is.
Okay, thank you.
And Costume Jim.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I have several thoughts. I'll try to be quick. First of all, I sleep next to a psychiatrist who works in NYU in the 9/11 PTSD program. So if, and she wants to get more involved. So as much as a 10-year burner can help with that, we're trying to find other ways to plug in there. And so I certainly overhear, she's working from home, a lot of these issues, number one. Number two, just the sociology of coming back together. I certainly understand the PTSD aspect, but as we, I'm with Costume Cult, we're rolling out big events in New York because a lot of us are vaccinated. And it's just the sociology of getting back with people and like being overwhelmed. And so our first event was in Prospect Park. After trying to rent anything that would let us go there, the only thing we could really do is go Renegade. And we had 600 people with vaccinated and tested wristbands. And that gave people a lot of very comfort that you could see on the wrist, vaccinated or tested. So there was just, you got past some paranoia or worries, and that helped. And then on our next event, our big blacklight event coming next Saturday, is our first indoor event, fully vaccinated. That's the rules in New York to have people inside. One of our more insightful people thought, we need a comfort area where people can get away from the stimulus because they're just not used to this anymore. It's 15 months of the bombardment of awesomeness that comes in our community, especially this event, which is like heavily black light and psychedelia. So the ability to have a comfort zone and some people there to help. So those are two things that, two thoughts for you. And then I guess really the question is beyond PTSD, but in terms of this re-socialization, reintegration, how can you advise on people sort of getting back on the horse, so to speak?
So what they're reacting to is like an internal fear. So it's just our own mechanism of staying cautious and being safe. So it's our whole nervous system is reacting because this is a new experience. There's people again together. So how do you figure that out? So you just take a deep breath and you just remain mindful of what's going on. So mindfulness is the key. Mindfulness basically means that at any given time, you know how your body is feeling. Is your body feeling tingly, or is your body feeling dead, or is your body feeling painful? So if you can just be aware of these three states at any given time, and you can just sit with your own feelings, that's the best way. And I think it's going to take some time, because when I went to a training and somebody came and gave me a hug, and I had such a big reaction to that. My whole body started to tremble, and I started having reactions. So I actually pushed that person away. And this was just like 3 weeks ago. So it's our own mechanism that's firing, and we just need to remain aware of it and just breathe and try to be calm. There's no trick to this, I think. But anybody who has any idea, Kathleen can jump in. Anybody who has any opinion or ideas, please jump in.
Yeah, mindfulness, such an important skill to practice. I share that with my clients in creating simple strategies. One strategy, I have a list of adult pleasurable events list. It's 158 things that you can choose to do to support you. Another thing is taking a moment to pause. That means breathing in and breathing out, while at the same time noticing what's going on inside your body and then outside your body in the outside world. So simple things such as that. One thing I typically assign to my clients on a regular basis when they know they're triggered, and typically you're triggered when your not so adaptive behaviors start showing up. And we know what our behaviors are. So, and we are not our behaviors, but they show up when we're stressed. And that can be from PTSD triggers. So one thing I have clients do is when they notice that, go sit in nature. And not only sit in nature, but find one thing to focus on and bring yourself to the current moment. So, I hope that helps us some strategies, to share. I do want to thank Yasin for sharing such wealth of information. And what I'd like to do, and this is all important stuff to understand. And as you notice it coming up for you or for others, do know that you can be there in a capacity of support. I found some words, I wrote them down and now I lost them. Somebody said it, but it was, in comforting others. So important that we create that comfort, and that can even be just a moment in looking at someone and saying, are you okay? I'm here for you, and being with them in that moment. So with that, I would like to reintroduce V. She's going to be talking about processing grief post-COVID. supporting the grief process, and share her creation of the Burner Day of Reflection. So additionally, she'll be talking more on resilience and how to recognize resilience and use that with and for each other and our communities. So I'm going to turn it over to you, V.
Lovely. Thank you, Kathleen. So, and actually, it's interesting, the question that you posed, Jim, because I think some of that will also kind of come up as I speak a little bit about kind of the day that I organised. So as Kathleen said, back in March, I organised a Burner Day of Reflection, and I'll come on and tell you a little bit more about that, because I think that's going to be really helpful for you guys in thinking about how you can go back into your communities, and as you're organising events and as you're kind of organising experiences within the community, hopefully it will give you some really good ideas and some really good ways for integrating some of this kind of this psychological care. And for me, you know, that's particularly around grief work, as we'll explore. But I'm sure, you know, there will be other kind of applications to this as well. But before I talk about that, I want to give you a little bit of a background to how I came to be organising the Burner Day of Reflection. So as Kathleen said, back in 2012, I set up something called Dust to Dust. And that really grew out of a number of different things that I was kind of working on and involved in. I trained to be a counsellor, work particularly with clients that have been bereaved, who are struggling with the kind of complicated grief that we spoke about a moment ago. And that was something that really very much came out of my own experience of struggling with grief as a teenager, and then finally sort of finding healing as an adult. So that sort of really came from my own experience. But that sort of evolved alongside my experiences being a burner, being a temple guardian, also getting involved in the Death Cafe movement, which is something that began in the UK. Very much, you know, if it's not something you've heard of, I really suggest check it out. It's an amazing initiative. Very British in the sense that the idea is that you talk about death and dying while you're sitting drinking tea and eating cake. But, you know, there's lots of different kind of ways that it can be applied. So for me, Dust to Dust became about, here's a space for burners to come and talk about death and dying, you know, and that was in the form of organising death cafes at burn events, also workshops, talking about grief, just really to sort of to raise awareness, recognising that a lot of the clients that I see as a counsellor come to me because they don't know how to talk to friends and family. And actually, you know, if we can change that in society, it would make it so much easier. A painful process still, of course, but make that kind of painful process one that would be easier to share with the natural kind of support networks that we all have. So that's a little bit about kind of Dust to Dust and how that came about. And as Yasin said, you know, 2020, there has been a huge amount of bereavement, as we know, you know, whole, goodness me, the numbers have been incredible around the world in terms of loss. But also what we were really recognizing was that loss can take many forms as grief, but change and needing to kind of cope and process that can come in many different forms. And in 2020, we were all dealing with a huge amount of change and loss, you know, the loss of access to friends and family, the loss of access to work colleagues, normality, routine, things like that. So in thinking about how we could do some work to actually support people through that, wasn't just thinking about bereavement, it was very much thinking about loss and change as well. And of course, at the Burn, at Regional Burns, we have the temple, and I've got a beautiful temple behind me there. But of course, we know that couldn't happen in person in 2020. And we had a beautiful virtual temple burn instead back in September. But actually, what really struck me, what I was really mindful of, was that there were a lot of people, certainly that I was aware of in the burner community in London and the UK, a lot of people who were kind of stuck in lockdown in different forms at different times, feeling very isolated, really missing the community. You know, the community might be there at online events, but actually kind of really missing the interaction in between. So I was aware that there would be a lot of burners out there who would be dealing with their own grief, processing their own grief by themselves, you know, even though the pandemic has very much been an experience that's affected us all. Actually, you know, it's a lot isolated and meant a lot of people are on their own and potentially struggling. So back in March, previously to March, I started hearing about something in the UK called the National Day of Reflection, which was being organised by a large charity over here. And the idea of the National Day of Reflection was to have a day when everyone in the UK would be invited to come together to really honour all of the people that had been lost as a result of COVID-19. And I thought that was a really beautiful, kind of really simple idea. And there are some of the ideas from the day that I'll come in and talk about that we borrowed for the Burner Day of Reflection. But actually, again, you know, what we decided to do in thinking about the Burner Day of Reflection was make it more expansive than that. This wasn't just about bereavement. This was about taking a moment, taking a day when we could pause and reflect and think about what do we need in this moment? What do we need in our grief? How do we come together, feel that support of community around? The idea of the National Day of Reflection was to coincide with the anniversary of the UK's first national lockdown. So it's very much about sort of something that was kind of happening around the UK on the same day. And actually, as I said, so, you know, really wanted this to be an opportunity for burners to come together, to think about kind of change and loss, not just as a result of bereavement, but also feel the support of one another. So that was how it evolved. And that was sort of the kind of the aim for the day. And there are various different elements to it. It started with, and sorry, just to explain, what I'm going to do here is just kind of break the day down and explain why we chose to do the things that we did, why we kind of chose the different elements of the day that we did. Essentially, you know, grief, for anyone that's ever experienced it, is very much a kind of a multifaceted experience. You know, it's an experience that doesn't just affect our emotions or our day-to-day life. You know, it's something that really kind of affects us in all sorts of different ways. You know, our body, our mind, how we think, how we act, what we do. So what we wanted across the day was elements that would really help to address those different facets. So what we started with was a meditation, which incorporated the minute silence that was part of the National Day of Reflection, that for people that wanted to honour that. And we had a wonderful, wonderful host for that meditation who really created a very grounding, very kind of held meditation, which offered the opportunity for burners to both, you know, sort of step into this space, but also to know that they could come back to something that inside of themselves, which would feel very grounded and safe and held. So that was the idea of both the honoring the minute silence, but also honoring, you know, that actually we kind of really wanted to start with something very grounded, so that burners knew that they would be safe in this space and that they could come back to their own place of safety. Again, a bit like Yasin was talking about, you know, really sort of knowing that kind of inner sense of grounding. We then moved on to have a death cafe. And as I say, if you've not heard about this, this is something really simple. You can check out the website. There are guidelines for setting this up, and essentially anyone can do it, although there's some really good kind of parameters for how to think about structuring that. But that was a really kind of accessible way for people to kind of just start to kind of drop in and talk about, you know, what felt most pertinent to them. We then moved on to a wonderful TED Talk, which again, I really recommend. If you get a chance, have a look on YouTube, on the internet, you'll find a TED Talk by a fantastic, actually, I'm not sure if she's a burner or just very burner inspired, TED Talk by Dr. Kim Bateman, called Singing Over Bones. And she talks about rituals. She talks about how we can kind of bring ritual into our own lives as a way of really, really honoring loved ones that we've lost, but in a really beautiful, simple way. And we were very lucky that actually, when I reached out to her to ask her if we could use the TED Talk, she very kindly also offered to come on board and answer some questions and talk to us about it as well. So that was fantastic. But if you don't have a chance, well, if you get a chance, I really recommend watching the TED Talk, because it's all about ritual. It talks about the temple and the meaning of the temple and the aim of that. We then had a session which was beautiful breath work and movement session, and that was a fantastic opportunity really to sort of to get into our bodies again, you know, and again, a bit like Yasin was saying, to kind of come into the moment, to really kind of feel the experience of all of 2020, but also to kind of to start to kind of move and breathe with it again. So, you know, particularly for people who may be struggling with anxiety or maybe struggling with grief, actually to start to kind of move and breathe with that was an amazing opportunity. And for me as a grief worker, it was also fantastic because it gave me a chance to kind of move. So that's also something to think about, that if you're organizing events, if you're working with grief or you're working with kind of loss and change yourselves, then the movement and breath work are a really good way to help to kind of keep things moving for you as a practitioner as well. We then had a fantastic event, which was organized by a couple of burners who do a lot of workshops around both conscious sexuality and grief and loss. So they organized a beautiful workshop, which was specifically, you know, really to sort of, in a way, you know, take burners by the hand in supporting them to really kind of meet their grief. And that was a beautiful kind of dust in my eyes grief workshop. And then we also had, as the kind of final piece of the day, and again to coincide with the National Day of Reflection that was happening in the UK, we organised a Bring Your Light to the Virtual Temple ceremony. So the invitation to burners was that as dusk fell, they were invited to bring sources of light you know, whether or not that was L-wire or a candle or fairy lights or a flashing hoop, you know, whatever source of light that they wanted to bring. So that the idea was that as the sun started to go down on the day, actually the light would kind of shine through. And of course, this was all online, all on Zoom, but actually, you know, to really kind of end the day with this sort of, if you can imagine it, beautiful kind of lots of light, as a real kind of symbol of hope and solidarity, of light shining through the darkness, you know, to really help people to kind of get that sense of, we're not alone in this, there are other people out there, you know, those little kind of points of light are part of the experience of being a burner. And I just want to share finally with you, alongside, throughout the day, what we also had as part of this experience was a virtual temple wall. So obviously, you know, at a burn event, you might normally be writing on the temple wall or taking an offering or a dedication to the temple. And actually what we had instead was this, and actually what I've done to keep this private, to keep this kind of confidential, we created, I've recreated the temple wall here for you to see. And these are essentially just some of my own offerings that I've added here, so that you can kind of get a sense of what it looked like, rather than this being anyone's, you know, kind of personal offerings. And then we just had this up during the day so that people could add their own kind of personal dedications to the wall. So they could come and add a photo, add a poem, add a, you know, sort of something meaningful to them. And then just like the temple, after a couple of weeks, that ceased to be, you know, so that literally we kind of released that temple wall, as it were, kind of back into the ether. So yes, I just wanted to just really kind of give you a sense of just some of the ways in which, oh, just lost you there. There we go, back again. So yeah, so I just really wanted to kind of give you that as a sense of, these are some of the ways in which we as a community here in London, here in the UK, came together to offer a space for burners to grieve, to process their loss and their experiences of loss and change. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to stop there, because I really want to also kind of hand over to you in case you have any questions or there's anything that you want to share or say. But that was really the aim of the day, and I really hope that you will take some of those ideas, use them for your own if they feel relevant to you. But yes, I want to come over to you guys now and just hear if you have any questions or anything that you wanted to say.
As a orga of events, because yes, we definitely have for the next edition to think about how we celebrate something together after what happened. But my other concern is maybe more pragmatic. I belong in France and also at Nowhere, a regional in Europe, to the harm reduction risk crew. Zendo, Green Dot mixed together, I would say. And my concern is the fact that we will have some vulnerable people on site. And I come out from your meeting with the idea I will have to go back to my central crew and say, this year, this next edition, we need to have a bigger crew from the volunteer in charge to welcome people being overwhelmed. Because it means we will have more people having that type of trouble on site. And of course, maybe with the help of a few chemical additional. So from organizational point of view, it means we will have really to have bigger teams. What do you think?
Was that a question for me, Crevette, or was that a question for sort of everybody?
Yes, it was maybe a little for everybody as the time is running, and there was not I didn't feel enough that aspect, so that's the reason why I wanted to ask about it.
Yeah, I've heard of other people saying the same things in other places as well, that the first time we'll get together in 2022 also, we'll probably need a larger number of volunteers. Even for our program, for CIT, that's what they're talking about.
Okay, so thank you so much. I'm glad you were here. Bye, guys.
Cook it with emotion. Yeah, treat it like it's sacred, like it's sacred. Cook it with emotion. You gotta cook it, treat it like it's sacred. Gonna make some music together. Beautifuls, it is fantastic to see you again.